He said his ex was just a friend. I believed him, because love makes you deaf to the tone of your own doubt. But one quiet evening, something small and glittering turned that phrase into a weapon. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, learning how silence can expose everything words try to hide. Let's say his name was Mark. He was the kind of man who looked trustworthy on autopilot. Steady voice, neat hands, polite laughter. People said he was calm. I thought that meant stable. It really meant rehearsed. We'd been living together for almost a year, building a version of normal that photographed well, matching coffee mugs, grocery lists on the fridge, movie nights where our knees touched under a blanket. I'm 29, old enough to recognize comfort, young enough to mistake it for safety. At first, everything seemed balanced. He'd kiss my shoulder in the morning, send texts that sounded like habits disguised as care. I loved the ordinary rhythm of us. Maybe that's why I ignored the first false notes when they came. A late reply here, a vague excuse there. You can drown quietly in things that look calm. The first time I saw her name, it was just an initial and a heart flashing on his phone at midnight. He smiled that soft, professional smile. Just a friend, he said, stirring his coffee. Let's say her name was Linda. I told myself I was mature, that trust meant not flinching at coincidence. So I swallowed my questions like bad medicine and called it faith. Then small changes gathered, longer showers, phone face down, shirts that smelled like detergent we didn't own. He started jogging at sunset, though he hated running. Each excuse fit, but the picture didn't. I tried to be rational, the version of myself who doesn't snoop, who believes that love means space. But space became distance, and distance started to hum. That night was nothing special. Rain had thinned to mist, the city blinking through the blinds like Morse code. Mark texted that he'd be late. Client dinner, the phrase already worn from use. I made tea, turned on the lamp, and tried to read, but every word slid off the page. The apartment felt too tidy, too still, as if waiting to be interrupted. When I went to close the curtain, the hem brushed the nightstand and nudged the top drawer open. A small sound, wood against wood. Inside lay the clutter of our life. Receipts, spare keys, a lip balm, a ticket stub. My hand moved without purpose, fingertips grazing coins and paper, then something colder. A necklace, thin chain, tiny pendant, faint perfume that wasn't mine. It caught the light, like a quiet confession. I turned it over in my palm, waiting for logic to arrive. It didn't. The clock ticked, the kettle cooled, the street outside whispered with tires on wet pavement. I looked around the room, the bed we shared, his jacket on the chair, the photo of us smiling at a barbecue, and understood that nothing visible had changed. Only I had. I thought about all the moments that suddenly felt staged. His sudden phone checks, the new playlist full of slow songs, the way he'd say you can look at my phone any time, like a magician inviting the audience to watch closer. It wasn't guilt, it was performance. The necklace sat in my palm, warm now, pulsing faintly with borrowed meaning. My breathing evened out, slower, deliberate. I expected anger, but what arrived was clarity. A cold, precise awareness settling where love used to live. I didn't want an argument. I wanted honesty, and that was already gone. I placed the necklace on the dresser, next to his watch, careful not to tangle the chain. The silence between objects felt charged, like static before lightning. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, listening to the clock divide the seconds into before and after. When the hallway light flicked on and footsteps approached, I didn't panic. I wasn't calm either. I was balanced, the kind of balance that comes when you finally stop pretending you don't know. The sound of his key in the lock felt almost polite. I stayed seated on the edge of the bed, palms flat on my knees, heartbeat steady but misaligned with the rest of the world. The lamp spread a soft gold halo that didn't reach the corners of the room. When Mark walked in, shaking rain from his jacket, he looked ordinary. Maybe too ordinary. That's how liars survive. They dress the part of everyday life so convincingly that truth feels intrusive. He smiled when he saw me, "Hey, you're up." "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice level. The necklace was still on the dresser, its chain catching the lamplight like a whisper that refused to stay quiet. His eyes flicked toward it, then back to me. A tiny pause, one heartbeat too long. That was the moment I knew he knew. He set his keys down carefully, the way people handle glass when they're pretending it's nothing. "Rough night," he murmured. "Client meeting went over." His tone was a practice melody, familiar, soothing, rehearsed. The words landed between us like tissue paper, soft, transparent, useless. I nodded. "You should shower." Simple, neutral. He hesitated, maybe waiting for the argument to start, but I didn't offer him that luxury. When he disappeared into the bathroom, the door clicked shut, and water began to thunder against tile. I stood. My reflection in the dark window looked almost calm, like I'd been preparing for this version of myself all along. The apartment had changed temperature. I could feel it in my fingertips, that strange mix of grief and relief that follows recognition. Every sound became sharp. The rush of water, the hum of the refrigerator, the slow tick of the clock slicing through pretense. The necklace still waited in the light. I picked it up, turned it once, and slipped it into my pocket. It didn't belong on display yet. When he came out, steam trailing behind him, he smelled like citrus and soap, fresh layers to cover something old. He leaned against the doorway, towel draped around his shoulders, casual to the point of insult. "You okay?" he asked. His face played the role of concerned partner so well that for a second I admired the performance. Then I realized admiration was just another form of denial. "I'm fine," I said. "Just couldn't sleep." He nodded, pretending to believe it, and crossed the room to kiss the top of my head. I didn't move. The gesture landed but didn't connect. You can't fake gravity. It's either there or it isn't. We climbed into bed. The sheets felt colder than they should. He fell asleep too quickly. Men like him always can. I lay awake, watching the ceiling change colors with every passing car. The hum of the city outside felt oddly comforting. At least something was honest about its noise. I turned on my side, facing him. His profile looked peaceful, almost boyish, and I wondered how many lies could fit inside a single heartbeat. By dawn, I still hadn't slept. The light that leaked through the blinds was thin and pale, the kind that exposes dust and secrets. I got up quietly, walked to the kitchen, and poured water into a glass. The tile was cold under my feet. Every movement felt deliberate, ceremonial, like I was already rehearsing detachment. When he stirred and came out, squinting, the morning wrapped around us in a silence that wasn't comfortable anymore. He asked if I wanted breakfast, and I said no. He asked if I was mad, and I said no again. The truth was too big to fit in those small syllables. After he left for work, I stood in the doorway, listening to the echo of his footsteps fade down the hall. The necklace was still in my pocket, pressing lightly against my thigh. A reminder, a weight, a beginning. I took it out, placed it on the table, and stared at it until the sunlight hit the pendant just right. It sparkled once, bright and clean, and I realized that even lies have a kind of beauty when you stop believing in them. Outside, a car horn broke the quiet. Somewhere below, someone laughed. Life, inconsiderate as ever, kept going. I exhaled slowly and let the air leave my body without shaking. Something inside me had shifted for good. I didn't feel broken. I felt awake. Before there was the necklace, before the late-night walks and half-truths, there was us. Two people who honestly believed we'd outrun the ordinary traps of love. Let's say it started 3 years ago at a friend's housewarming. I was the one refilling the snack bowl to avoid small talk. He was the one making everyone laugh without trying. He asked for my number before dessert, and by the time I left, my phone was already glowing with his first text. "You seem like the calm in other people's storms." It was flattering, maybe prophetic. I'd always been the listener, the one who smoothed the sharp edges of other people's moods. Mark didn't seem to need smoothing. He carried confidence like a scent. Quiet, practiced, convincing. In the early months, that steadiness felt like safety. I'd been through one of those messy, gaslit relationships that leave you allergic to drama. Mark was the antidote. Calm voice, thoughtful questions, patience that looked like empathy. He cooked. That was the first sign I ignored. A man who uses recipes as performance art. Candlelight, jazz playlists, the easy choreography of someone who's practiced affection until it looks effortless. We became that couple, the one friends teased for finishing each other's sentences, the one that hosted dinners and gave relationship advice we had no business giving. When he asked me to move in, it wasn't dramatic. It just makes sense, he said, and it did. My lease was ending. His apartment had space, and love always sounds logical before it costs you something. The place was on the 5th floor of a building that smelled faintly of coffee and paint. From the balcony, you could see a strip of the river and, on good days, a sliver of sunset that made everything look gentler than it was. The first night there, I unpacked my books while he hung pictures. I remember thinking how perfectly our habits aligned. His precision, my patience. The illusion of compatibility can be so convincing when both people want to believe the same lie. He said he liked how I noticed small things, the way people twist rings when they're nervous, how rain changes color on pavement. I liked how he listened, or seemed to. For a while, life settled into a rhythm that almost sang. We had Saturday markets, Sunday brunches, weeknight takeout, and quiet laughter in the kitchen. He'd brush my shoulder when he passed, and the small contact felt like punctuation at the end of each day. I didn't know that love can hum, even when one of you has already turned down the volume. Looking back, I can trace the fault lines, tiny things that only make sense once the earthquake has happened. The way he avoided talking about the future, the subtle hesitation when friends asked about marriage, the way his eyes slid past mine when someone mentioned loyalty. I mistook neutrality for maturity. He was attentive in gestures, not in presence. Flowers on Thursdays, texts during meetings, playlists set just because. Every act came with just enough care to keep me soft. It worked. I mistook consistency for honesty. Sometimes, late at night, he'd tell stories about his past. Not deep ones. Small anecdotes about college or road trips with friends. There was always a she in those stories. Never a name, never much detail. Just she, the ghost in every laugh. I didn't ask. I thought not asking made me trusting. It actually made me blind. I remember one afternoon at a cafe when his phone buzzed, and he flipped it face down so fast the spoon rattled in his cup. I laughed it off. He smiled, said, "You know how clients can be." I did know. That was the problem. I'd learned to rationalize other people's shadows. Still, there were good days. Too many to dismiss, which is what made the bad ones harder to name. Love doesn't die all at once. It erodes like shoreline, grain by grain, almost tenderly. And I kept sweeping the sand back, pretending the ocean could be reasoned with. By the time we reached last spring, we'd become two polite actors in a play about normal life. He worked late, I stayed busy. We shared dinners filled with small talk that sounded like static. But every so often he'd look at me like he remembered the opening scene, and for a moment, I'd forget that the script had changed. If anyone had asked, I would have said we were fine. That word, fine, is such an elegant costume for fear. There's a photo of us from that first summer together, me in a white dress, him in a navy shirt, sunlight scattered through the trees. Everyone says we look happy, and they're right. We were, or at least I was, which sometimes feels like the same thing until you learn the difference. I remember that day clearly, the smell of sunscreen, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder, the taste of lemonade that was too sweet. He took the picture on his phone, then kissed my temple like he'd captured something worth keeping. I didn't realize he was already curating memories for later. Back then, trust felt like breathing, automatic, invisible, and only noticed when it's gone. I didn't check his messages, didn't question late meetings, didn't track his moods like weather. I believed that respect meant space, that love didn't have to be guarded. He rewarded that faith with gestures that looked like reassurance, a surprise coffee at my office, a handwritten note on my birthday that read, "You make calm look easy." I taped it to the fridge for months, until one day it stopped making sense. My friends liked him. He was the kind of man who carried groceries for strangers and remembered people's dogs by name. He blended in so smoothly that it never occurred to anyone he might also be performing. Charm is a perfect disguise because everyone wants to believe it. I did too. When they said, "You're lucky," I smiled and said, "I know. The truth is, luck is just danger you haven't met yet." Still, there were flickers. He'd pull away when I tried to talk about the future, dismiss it as too soon, even after years. He kept parts of his world sealed. Friends I never met, trips I never joined. When I asked, he'd say, "You'd be bored," with a grin that made me feel childish for wanting inclusion. That's the trick. You stop questioning exclusion when it's wrapped in affection. The cracks widened quietly. He started volunteering information I hadn't asked for. We grabbed drinks, but it was nothing. She called late, but she's going through a breakup. Sentences so specific they circled their own guilt. I told myself transparency was good, even when it sounded rehearsed. You can convince yourself of anything if you say "we're fine" in the right tone. Then there was the weekend trip he canceled last minute. His mother, he said, wasn't feeling well. I sent flowers, called twice, no answer. Later I learned she'd been on vacation in Arizona. He apologized for forgetting to update me, and I accepted it because exhaustion sometimes wears the mask of forgiveness. It was easier to mend the surface than admit the foundation was shifting. We still had our moments. The lazy Sundays, the way he'd hum while cooking, the nights we'd dance barefoot in the kitchen when no one was watching. Those fragments kept me anchored. I told myself love is work, that people are flawed, that commitment means endurance. But endurance without honesty is just waiting. He was good at waiting, at pretending, at loving just enough to keep me near but not enough to stay transparent. I started keeping small secrets too. Not betrayals, just bits of myself I didn't bother to share. A thought unspoken here, a story untold there. Distance works both ways. Sometimes survival looks like silence. I began to notice that every apology came with a reward. Flowers, a dinner reservation, a laugh that wiped the slate clean. He understood the psychology of guilt better than most therapists. I played my part too, smiling through discomfort, convincing myself that calm meant control. It didn't. It meant surrender. By last winter, the quiet between us had thickened. We moved through the apartment like polite strangers, renting the same lie. I'd catch him watching me sometimes, not lovingly but analytically, as if calculating how much truth I could stand. I'd smile back, just to prove I wasn't afraid of the answer. That's the thing about hindsight. It edits the footage. The early days play in soft focus, golden light, laughter spilling over coffee. But if you slow it down, you see it. The glance at his phone during dinner, the smile that doesn't reach his eyes, the moment he starts saying we less and I more. The story was already rewriting itself while I was still memorizing the old lines. And now, when I think of that girl in the white dress, I want to tell her that love isn't supposed to make you anxious about the quiet. I want to warn her that kindness isn't proof, that calm can be camouflage, and that the first red flag will always feel like home if you've been taught to ignore the fire. It started with small things, the kind you dismiss because they seem too petty to mention. A message he didn't answer while sitting right beside me. The way his tone shifted when he said we, like the word had grown heavier. Love teaches you to rationalize the tremors as background noise, but tremors are always rehearsals for collapse. One night in late autumn, he came home later than usual. The air outside still smelled like rain, and his jacket was damp at the cuffs. I asked if everything was okay, and he kissed my forehead before answering. His eyes didn't match his voice. They darted toward the hallway, toward his phone glowing faintly on the table like a nervous witness. I wanted to believe him. Habit makes belief feel safer than curiosity. But curiosity had been pacing at the edges of my patience for weeks, restless and whispering. So when he stepped into the shower, I glanced at the screen. Just one message preview. Miss you already. No name. Just that. My stomach reacted before my mind caught up. A cold drop, like water finding a leak. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Because opening it would have made it real. And I was still bargaining for another chapter where the villain was just my imagination. He came out humming, hair damp, towel over his shoulders, and smiled like nothing was burning. I smiled back. That's what women do when they're auditing hope. The next morning, I told myself to stop overthinking. I put on lipstick, answered emails, went to work, but even fluorescent light can't bleach anxiety. His texts that day were too polite, too measured, punctuation perfect. He'd never been careful before. Guilt always makes people careful. Later that week, we went to dinner with friends. They teased us for being couple goals. He laughed and squeezed my hand under the table. It should have felt reassuring. Instead, his touch felt like choreography, well-timed, precise, empty. Across the restaurant, a woman waved at him. He waved back, quick, casual. "Old client," he said when I asked. The word client was starting to sound like cover. That night, while he brushed his teeth, I studied the reflection of us in the bathroom mirror. My expression looked composed, but my eyes betrayed me. They were already rewriting our story, scene by scene. He caught my gaze and smiled, foam at the corner of his mouth. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," I said, but silence doesn't mean nothing. It means not yet. The next day, I left work early. Something pulled me home, a quiet instinct disguised as an errand. The apartment felt staged. Too neat, the air faintly scented with perfume that wasn't mine. A soft sweetness, almost apologetic. I walked through the room slowly, touching objects that suddenly seemed foreign. His jacket on the chair, our framed photo on the shelf, the coffee cup he always forgot to rinse. Everything looked correct, which is how you know it isn't. I sat on the couch and waited. The clock on the wall marked each minute with the patience of someone who's seen this before. When he arrived, he looked startled to find me there. "You're home early," he said. "So are you," I answered. He blinked, recalibrating. Lies hate improvisation. We talked, if you can call it that. I asked about his day. He gave me summaries with missing nouns. I nodded in all the right places, pretending to accept the redacted version of his life. When his phone buzzed again, he flipped it face down. That motion, simple and practiced, sliced through whatever denial I had left. Later, as we sat watching a movie neither of us followed, I realized the distance between us wasn't physical. It was made of withheld truths and unsaid fears. The silence thickened until it became a third presence in the room. Every time he looked at me, I could feel him calculating whether I knew. Every time I looked back, I wondered the same. I went to bed first. He stayed in the living room, pretending to scroll. Through the wall, I heard the faint buzz of his phone and a low chuckle he tried to swallow. My chest tightened. I counted the beats in the dark. 1, 2, 3, each a step away from the person I thought he was. In the morning, he acted normal, as if our love could be ironed smooth. He made coffee, kissed my cheek, asked about my plans. I answered automatically, studying the way light hit his face. It was the same face I'd memorized, but now it carried a thin film of distance, like a photograph left in the sun too long. People say heartbreak feels like pain. They're wrong. Pain at least demands attention. This was quieter, more surgical. The slow withdrawal of something vital and the terrifying awareness that you're letting it happen. When he left for work, I stood by the door long after it closed, listening to the echo fade down the hallway. Then I turned off my phone, sat on the floor, and let the quiet finally speak. It didn't say much, just you already know. Denial is a quiet addiction. It doesn't roar. It whispers logic until you can't tell the difference between calm and numb. I told myself I needed proof, something solid to justify the storm that was already forming behind my ribs. Proof gives you permission to break. Suspicion only makes you look paranoid. So I started noticing everything, the receipts in his jacket pockets, each one a breadcrumb, a wine bar across town, a boutique hotel I'd never heard of, a florist's card with no handwriting. He'd shrug when I asked, offering explanations that sounded smooth, sanded down from overuse. Client dinner, Team drinks, wrong pocket. The words stacked neatly, like bricks in a wall between us. The next week, he changed his phone password. Work policy, he said. My laugh sounded too high, almost brittle. I knew it was a lie because he didn't flinch while saying it. The best liars look you right in the eye. They've practiced until the truth feels awkward. Nights became performances. We'd eat dinner like strangers, pretending to remember the script. He'd ask about my day. I'd answer with edited honesty. The pauses between sentences stretched longer until they felt like warnings. Sometimes he'd reach for my hand and I'd let him, just to study how touch can lose its language. One evening, while folding laundry, I found a lipstick stain on his shirt collar, a pale rose color, too soft to accuse, too intimate to ignore. I stood there, the fabric warm from the dryer, and understood that betrayal doesn't always come crashing through the door. Sometimes it drifts in like perfume, subtle but impossible to wash out. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I cooked dinner, poured wine, and smiled like someone rehearsing forgiveness. He told a story about a new client, a woman who really gets marketing. He laughed too loudly at his own joke. I watched the vein in his neck twitch as he spoke, and wondered how long it had been since he'd looked at me without editing. After dinner, he went to shower. I stood by the window, watching our reflection ripple against the glass. The necklace, the messages, the receipts, each one lined up in my mind like evidence on a table. I could almost hear them breathing. I realized I wasn't searching for the truth anymore. I already had it. I was just delaying the sentence. When he came out, towel slung low on his hips, he looked at me with mild confusion. "You okay?" he asked again, as if repetition could erase suspicion. "Fine," I said. That word had become my disguise. Later, I dreamed of water. Deep, still, endless. I woke up with my throat dry and my heart racing. The bed beside me was empty. From the living room came the faint blue glow of his phone screen. I stayed in the doorway, watching him type fast, smiling at something I couldn't see. He didn't notice me. It felt symbolic, almost poetic in its cruelty. The next morning, sunlight cut through the blinds, sharp and exposing. He was cheerful, almost too much. Made breakfast, whistled. That's the thing about guilt. It overperforms. I ate in silence, memorizing his mannerisms like a scientist cataloging a species about to vanish. At work, I couldn't focus. The office buzzed around me, voices blending into static. I opened my notebook and wrote down everything I knew. Message, necklace, perfume, lipstick, receipts. The list looked harmless, but my chest tightened as if I'd summoned a storm. That evening, when I got home, his car wasn't there. He hadn't mentioned going out. The apartment felt hollow, staged again. I sat at the table and stared at my phone, at the unread messages from friends, asking when we'd get married, if I was happy, if we'd thought about buying a house. I typed and deleted a dozen replies before leaving the screen blank. The clock reached midnight before the lock finally clicked. He came in, smelling faintly of whiskey and something floral. "Sorry, lost track of time," he said, words heavy but rehearsed. I nodded, my voice steady. "You always do." He froze, eyes flicking to mine. A pause stretched between us, tense, almost tangible. Then he laughed, but the sound cracked halfway through. "Don't start," he muttered. I didn't. I simply stood, walked past him, and closed the bedroom door. Behind it, my reflection waited in the mirror, pale and composed. I traced the edge of my jaw, surprised by how calm I looked. Maybe that's what heartbreak really is. Not chaos, but precision. The moment you stop needing answers because the silence has already spoken. I lay down, eyes open to the ceiling shadows, and understood something vital. Truth doesn't need permission to arrive. It just waits for you to stop pretending you can't hear it. There's a moment when suspicion stops being fear and becomes clarity. It doesn't announce itself. It settles, cold and absolute, like fog that refuses to lift. That morning, I woke up already knowing something would shift. The light was too sharp, the silence too clean. Mark moved around the apartment with mechanical calm, pouring coffee, checking his watch, saying things like, "Don't wait up." His voice was neutral, but his eyes flicked away like he couldn't stand their own reflection. After he left, I sat at the table and let the hours drip by. I wasn't crying. My body had moved past tears into something steadier, quieter, more surgical. The necklace sat beside my mug, coiled like a question mark that had finally stopped asking. I traced its shape with my fingertip and realized I didn't want an explanation anymore. I wanted confirmation. So I decided to find it. At noon, I drove downtown. His office building stood tall and reflective, glass catching the clouds like false innocence. I had been there once, long ago when things were simpler. I parked across the street, engine off, and waited. People came and went, faces lit by phones, eyes dulled by routine. Then he appeared. Mark, laughing with someone. A woman. Blonde hair, red coat, the kind of smile that isn't afraid to be seen. I watched him lean closer as she spoke, his hand brushing her back with casual ownership. It wasn't dramatic, just familiar. The small, thoughtless intimacy of two people who have stopped pretending they're just colleagues. When she touched his arm, I felt the world narrow into one clear line. Him, her, me, and all the spaces in between that used to belong to love. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I followed at a distance, the way grief sometimes follows joy. They walked to a cafe on the corner, one we'd passed together 100 times but never entered. Through the window, I saw them sit close, her hand resting on his wrist as he talked. He looked lighter than he had in months. That hurt most, the relief on his face, the comfort of his betrayal. When he finally left, alone, I stayed parked for a while, fingers pressed against the steering wheel, breath shallow. My body was trembling, but not from shock. It was the kind of tremor that comes when you stop running from the truth. The calm that follows recognition isn't peace, it's surrender to reality. That night, I waited for him at home. The apartment smelled faintly of rain again, as if the weather were mocking my consistency. I lit no candles, made no dinner. I wanted the space to feel honest, stripped of pretense. The clock hands crawled toward 10 when his key finally turned in the lock. He looked tired, maybe even guilty, though I doubt he knew which mask he was wearing. "Hey," he said softly, as if testing the air. I didn't answer. His eyes flicked around, at the empty table, the untouched glass of water, me sitting still in the low light. "You okay?" That question again, the one he always asked, to sound attentive. I smiled faintly. "You should stop asking me that," I said. "You already know the answer." He frowned, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" I gestured to the drawer, the same one that had betrayed him weeks ago. "You left something in there." He hesitated, walked over, opened it. The necklace was gone. His hand froze in the air, then dropped. He turned to me, mask cracking. "Where is it?" I reached into my pocket and set it on the table. The chain gleamed softly, innocent as sin. "You tell me," I said. My voice didn't shake. For a long moment, he said nothing. The air thickened, dense, with the sound of withheld lies. Then came the performance. "It's not what you think," he began, voice too smooth, too familiar. She left it in my car once. It's not." "Stop." One word, quiet, final. He froze. I stood slowly, chair legs whispering against the floor. "Don't insult both of us by pretending there's a version of this story where you look honest." His face twitched, guilt, panic, calculation all crowding at once. It didn't mean anything. He tried again, that line, the universal anthem of cowards. I almost laughed. "It meant enough for you to hide it," I said. My tone surprised even me, steady, almost kind. "That's the thing about lies, Mark. They don't erase the truth, they decorate it." He rubbed his face, pacing, hands shaking now. "I didn't want to hurt you," he muttered. "You did," I answered simply. "You just hoped I wouldn't notice." Quote. Silence followed, heavy but clean. I picked up the necklace one last time, feeling the weight of every word unspoken between us. "You can have it back," I said, placing it in his open palm. "It suits your collection of half-truths." He started to speak, but I was already walking toward the door. My pulse was steady, my breathing even. The kind of calm that isn't forgiveness, but closure wearing its quietest face. Behind me, I heard him say my name once, softly. I didn't turn around. Some names lose their meaning once spoken by the wrong mouth. He didn't chase me when I walked out. The sound of the door closing behind me was so soft, it almost felt polite. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and someone else's dinner, the kind of scent you notice only when your own life goes quiet. I pressed the elevator button and waited, heart beating like it was trying to remember its rhythm. When the doors opened, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. Eyes red-rimmed but clear, mouth steady. That was the thing about truth. It didn't make me smaller. It made me solid. Outside, the night had that sharp chill that makes every breath sting a little. The streetlights painted the pavement gold, and somewhere down the block someone laughed. It felt surreal that the world could keep functioning when mine had just folded in half. I walked without a plan, letting the city decide my direction. The rhythm of my footsteps steadied the chaos in my head. At some point, I found myself by the river. The water moved dark and slow, catching bits of light like fragments of thought. I leaned against the railing and let the cold metal bite into my palms. My mind kept replaying everything. His face when I said stop, the tremor in his voice, the way the necklace glowed like a guilty heartbeat. It should have broken me. Instead, it untangled me. He called, once, twice, then again. I watched the screen light up with his name, each buzz smaller, more desperate. Finally, I answered, not out of hope, but to end the noise. "Please," he said, voice hoarse, "can we just talk?" "We did," I replied. "You just weren't listening." "It didn't mean anything." "Then you threw away everything for nothing. That's worse." He started crying, or pretending to. I couldn't tell anymore. Empathy felt like an old coat that no longer fit. "I can't lose you," he said. "You already did." I hung up. The silence that followed wasn't cruel. It was clean. When I finally went back to the apartment, the lights were still on. He was sitting on the couch, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. For a second, I saw the man I thought I loved. Tired, human, broken. Then he looked up, and I saw the stranger behind his eyes, the one who'd rehearsed apologies before I ever asked for them. "Where did you go?" he whispered. "For a walk," I said. I needed to remember what air felt like. He tried to stand, but I held up a hand. "Don't," I said quietly. "Just stay there." He froze. I could almost see the realization hit him, the understanding that this wasn't a fight he could talk his way out of. "I'll do anything," he said. "I know," I said. "That's the problem. You'll do anything except tell the truth." He reached for me, but I stepped back. There was no anger left, no tears waiting their turn, only exhaustion and something cleaner than forgiveness. Clarity. "You should go," I told him. "Take whatever version of yourself you can still live with." Quote. He hesitated, eyes darting toward the bedroom, maybe thinking of the necklace, the evidence, the pieces of his double life scattered through the drawers. "This is our home," he said weakly. "No," I corrected. "It's where I learned what betrayal smells like." He left a few minutes later, the door clicking shut behind him. I stood in the silence he'd built and felt something unfamiliar. Peace, fragile but real. The air inside the apartment seemed lighter, as if it had been holding its breath all this time. I gathered the things that still felt like mine. The book on the nightstand, the blanket that smelled faintly of lavender, the mug with a small crack near the handle. I opened the windows, letting the night rush in. The curtains fluttered, soft and aimless. Somewhere, a siren wailed, distant and indifferent. I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, but because I'd already mourned him while he was still standing next to me. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, the city breathing outside. Every lie he'd told me echoed once, faintly, then disappeared. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for his footsteps, his messages, his voice. The quiet didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I realized I didn't need closure from him. I'd already found it in the sound of the door closing. I turned off the lights and watched the room dissolve into shadow. There, in the half-dark, I smiled, a small, tired curve of a mouth that had finally learned what honesty sounds like when it stops asking for permission. Morning came quietly, as if the world was apologizing for the night before. The light slipped between the blinds in soft, uneven stripes, touching the corners of the room that hadn't seen honesty in months. Mark's side of the bed was empty, the sheet creased but cooling. For a long minute, I just sat there, watching dust drift through sunlight, thinking how peace always looks ordinary when it finally arrives. The first thing I noticed was the stillness. No coffee brewing, no hum of his phone, no keys clattering into the bowl by the door. The absence was startlingly clean, like a sound cut mid-note. I breathed in and felt my ribs expand farther than they had in weeks. It didn't feel like freedom yet, just the absence of explanation. Sometimes that's enough. I made coffee for one. The spoon clinked against the mug, the smallest domestic rebellion. On the counter sat a note. He must have left sometime between guilt and cowardice. "I'm sorry, I need time." I laughed once. Quiet, because the word time felt like an insult. Time doesn't fix liars. It just gives them space to rearrange the story. I folded the note and dropped it into the trash without ceremony. Then I opened the windows. The air outside carried the faint smell of rain and exhaust, the city stretching awake. Somewhere below, someone's radio played a song I didn't know. For the first time in months, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it hang. It sounded like possibility. By noon, I'd started cleaning, not out of anger but instinct. I packed the fragments of our shared life into boxes. His books, his framed degrees, the sweater he'd forgotten at my place 2 years ago and never reclaimed. Each item made a small noise as it landed inside cardboard, a punctuation mark in a language only I needed to understand. I found the necklace last, still lying on the dresser where I'd left it after everything. It looked smaller now, powerless. I held it for a second, the chain cool against my skin, and felt no heat, no tremor, just neutrality. Then I placed it into a plain envelope and sealed it shut. No note, no message. Just an ending folded neatly inside paper. In the afternoon, I walked to the post office and dropped the envelope into the outgoing bin. The sound it made when it landed, a soft thud, felt like the final line of a poem that had gone on too long. I didn't imagine his reaction. That part of the story didn't belong to me anymore. Back home, the apartment looked different. The light reached farther, the shadows softer. I sat by the window with my coffee, watching people pass below, couples arguing quietly, kids racing each other down the sidewalk, a woman talking on her phone, smiling like she believed every word. The world was perfectly indifferent, and somehow that was comforting. Later, I gathered my things and left for a walk with no destination. My reflection in shop windows looked steadier, almost unfamiliar. The city smelled like wet concrete and possibility. I realized I'd spent so long measuring my worth in his attention that I'd forgotten the shape of solitude. But solitude, when it's honest, is a kind of grace. When my phone buzzed, I didn't need to check the screen. The sound itself told me enough. I turned it face down on the bench beside me, the same way he used to, and felt the symmetry of it. Difference was, I wasn't hiding anything. I was choosing peace. By sunset, I found myself back by the river. The water looked the same as the night before, dark, patient, moving forward no matter who watched. I leaned on the railing, letting the cold metal bite into my palms again. I thought about how love starts with promises and ends with choices, and how sometimes the bravest choice is to walk away quietly. A breeze carried the city's noise across the water. Sirens, laughter, the hum of traffic. Life, rude and resilient. I closed my eyes and breathed it in. The ache was still there, but lighter now, like a bruise fading under skin. I knew it would linger, but I also knew it wouldn't own me. When I turned to go home, the sky was the color of slate washed clean. I didn't look back. Some chapters don't need closure, they just need distance. In the days that followed, life rearranged itself quietly, without asking permission. Mornings became simpler. One mug, one toothbrush, one voice humming through the apartment. The air felt lighter, even the shadows less deliberate. I started noticing small things again. The pattern of sunlight on the floor, the sound of the mail slot, the smell of toast burning slightly because I'd stopped rushing. It's strange how peace always hides in details you used to ignore. Mark texted twice the next week. "Can we talk?" And later, "You deserve an explanation." I didn't reply. Explanations are just narratives dressed up as closure. I didn't want his version of events anymore. I had my own, and mine didn't require translation. The message bubbles stayed unread, glowing faintly like insects against the dark of my screen until they disappeared. I spent my evenings walking long, slow routes that had no destination. There was something healing in watching other people's lives unfold without mine in the frame. A father teaching his daughter to ride a bike, a couple arguing softly over groceries, an old woman feeding pigeons like she had all the time in the world. None of them knew me, which was its own kind of safety. At work, people noticed the difference before I did. "You seem calmer," my coworker said one morning. I smiled. It wasn't calm exactly. It was the absence of pretending. The mask I'd worn for months had slipped away, and beneath it was something simpler than happiness: relief. One afternoon, I ran into a mutual friend, someone who hadn't heard. She asked how Mark was, and I said, "He's fine." It wasn't bitterness. It was punctuation. She tilted her head, curious, but didn't press. Sometimes the story doesn't need retelling. It just needs to stop echoing. At home, I started reclaiming space. Rearranged the furniture, painted one wall a color he'd have hated. It wasn't revenge. It was renovation. I bought new sheets, replaced the framed photo with a print of an open road disappearing into mist. It reminded me that not all endings are abrupt. Some just fade into somewhere better. The hardest part wasn't missing him. It was unlearning the reflex to explain myself. For so long, I'd measured every reaction against his comfort. Too quiet, too emotional, too much. Now my thoughts moved freely, unedited. I found I liked the sound of my own voice filling the room without apology. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, I took the last of his things, the spare keys, the sweater, the old phone charger, and placed them in a paper bag by the door. I didn't label it. Labels belong to things you still care about. The next morning, I left it outside, by the recycling bins. It felt almost ceremonial. Weeks passed. The city slid toward winter, and I didn't mind the chill. I learned to make dinner for one without setting an extra plate. I slept diagonally, used every pillow, reclaimed the whole bed like a territory once lost. My body remembered how to rest. Sometimes, when the wind pressed against the windows just right, I'd think of him, not with anger, not even regret, just recognition. Some people enter your life like storms, loud, consuming, unforgettable. But when they leave, you realize you liked the quiet better. One night I dreamed of that necklace again. It wasn't heavy or sharp this time. It was simply gone. In the dream, I stood by the river, holding nothing, and felt lighter for it. When I woke, the air carried the same hush as the dream. I smiled before I knew why. I didn't forgive him, not because he didn't deserve it, but because forgiveness wasn't necessary anymore. Forgiveness is for wounds that still bleed. Mine had already scarred. The mark remained, but it no longer hurt to touch. When I passed our old cafe weeks later, the window reflections caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw the version of myself who used to wait inside, coffee cooling, heart rehearsing patience. I wanted to tell her she'd be fine, that she'd survive the truth and still find beauty in ordinary mornings. Back home, I opened the window wide. The night air smelled clean, sharp, new. I leaned against the sill, feeling the draft lift my hair, and whispered to no one in particular, "You did the right thing." The wind didn't answer, but it didn't need to. The silence agreed. Winter arrived like an exhale, slow, visible, and honest. The mornings turned pale, and the air carried that metallic scent that always comes before snow. My apartment looked different now. The emptiness had softened. It felt less like absence and more like space. Every sound, the kettle's hiss, the creak of the floorboards, belonged only to me, and that ownership felt sacred in its simplicity. Sometimes I still caught myself expecting the sound of his key in the door, a shadow moving across the hall. Habit is a stubborn ghost. But the difference was that I didn't fear it anymore. I'd let go of waiting. Healing, I realized, wasn't a single moment. It was a repetition of small choices that all whispered the same thing. Stay gone, stay whole. I started writing again. Not love letters, not confessions, just fragments of thought, small truths that fit on sticky notes. I covered the fridge with them. You're not too much. Peace is a verb. Some silences are merciful. Every morning, I'd read one aloud with my coffee. It became a ritual, a conversation between the woman I was and the woman I was still becoming. Outside, life kept moving. Couples argued on sidewalks. Delivery bikes rushed through puddles. Children shouted their names into the wind. The city didn't care about my heartbreak, and that, surprisingly, was freeing. I no longer needed the world to slow down for me. I just needed to keep walking at my own pace. One Sunday, I visited the river again, the same spot where I'd stood that night with a necklace in my hand. The water looked the same, cold, steady, always in motion. I leaned against the railing and smiled faintly. It was strange to stand in the same place and feel no ache, only understanding. That version of me had been trembling. This one was simply present. The wind lifted my hair and brushed against my cheek, soft as forgiveness. I whispered a quiet thank you, to the girl who stayed too long, to the woman who finally left, to the silence that taught me how to listen. I didn't need closure from him. I'd build my own. Later, back home, I made dinner and set the table for one. Candlelight flickered across the walls, and the room felt alive again, not haunted. I poured a glass of wine and raised it slightly, a private toast to the quiet victories no one applauds, choosing peace over explanation, solitude over false comfort, truth over performance. The phone buzzed once on the counter, an unknown number. I watched it light up, ring twice, fade. The silence that followed was the kind of music I'd been waiting for. As I washed the dishes, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. My face looked tired but certain. There was something beautiful in that, the steadiness of survival, the grace of imperfection. I thought about how love had once felt like a home I was constantly redecorating to make someone else comfortable. Now it felt like the air I breathed, mine, unmeasured, enough. Before bed, I opened my notebook and wrote a single line. Sometimes losing someone is the only way to find yourself without apology. I underlined it twice and closed the cover. The sound of the binding snapping shut was oddly satisfying, like a chapter ending itself. I turned off the lamp. The room sank into shadow, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. I lay there listening to the city hum, steady and indifferent, and smiled at how beautifully ordinary the night was. No confessions, no ghosts, no more waiting for footsteps that would never come. Just the sound of my own breathing, steady, free, alive. By spring, I stopped counting the days since he left. Time had stretched and softened, losing its sharp edges. The mornings were brighter now, the kind of light that doesn't ask for permission before entering. I'd wake to the sound of birds stitching their songs into the air, a rhythm that felt new but already familiar. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was domestic. It was clean sheets, folded laundry, food made just for me. I'd changed small things. New curtains, new plants, a mirror in the hallway that reflected only my face. At first, it felt strange to see my own image without comparison, but eventually, it became comforting. I started liking the quiet moments, brushing my hair in the morning, lighting a candle in the evening, humming along to songs I used to skip. Every small act felt like proof that I was rebuilding, one motion at a time. Once, I passed him on the street. It was a gray afternoon, the air thick with that pre-rain heaviness. He looked older somehow, smaller. His eyes widened when he saw me, but I didn't stop. We exchanged the kind of smile strangers give out of politeness. That was all, and that was enough. The closure I'd waited for had never needed his voice, only my distance. Later that day, I met a friend for coffee. She asked if I was seeing anyone new, and I laughed, not bitterly but gently. No, I said. I'm still learning how to love the quiet parts of myself. She nodded, maybe understanding, maybe not. Either way, it didn't matter. I wasn't in a hurry anymore. At home, the air smelled like rain and basil. I curled up on the couch with a book, the window cracked open to let the world breathe beside me. The city hummed outside. Cars, laughter, wind, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel separate from it. I wasn't a woman with a wound. I was a person with a life. Before bed, I found the sticky notes still clinging to the fridge. Some edges were curling now, their ink faded slightly. I peeled one off. Peace is a verb, and stuck it inside my journal. It felt right to carry it forward. I turned off the lights and stood by the window, watching the reflection of the streetlights ripple across the glass. I thought about all the versions of myself that had lived inside this story, the hopeful girl, the trusting woman, the one who looked for answers in other people's faces. I wanted to thank them all for getting me here, to this still, unremarkable, miraculous calm. There's something sacred about realizing you survived without spectacle. No grand revenge, no audience, no dramatic monologue, just endurance, grace, and the quiet decision to move on. That's the kind of victory that doesn't glitter, but it lasts. The city lights blinked below like distant promises. Somewhere out there, other people were learning the same lesson, one heartbreak at a time. That thought didn't make me sad. It made me feel connected, like we were all small constellations in the same wide, forgiving dark. I whispered into the room, almost smiling, "I'm okay." The words didn't echo. They landed softly and stayed. And if you've ever stood in that same silence, holding the proof of someone's betrayal, feeling the weight of it turn into clarity, I hope you know this. You will breathe again. It won't be the same breath, but it will be yours. Has this ever happened to you? Share your story in the comments.